Welcome to the OK Let's Learn podcast. This is two podcasts in one. One where we dive into tons of great topics, and another one where we dive into tons of great stories and books. My name is Kevin O'Keefe. So today, let's learn all about ants. Yes, ants. Following up on insects, our episodes on insects, following up on our episode on the honeybee. When you're thinking of insects, you got to think of ants. If you live where I live in New Jersey, you picture these tiny black ants marching across our kitchen counters when anybody drops any kind of food. That little crumb. Maybe you've seen them climbing the wall, moving in a straight line like a tiny parade. Or maybe you've noticed a little anthill in your yard, that small pile of dirt. And if you stay closely and just kind of sit up in the stands and just watch them, there's ants popping in and out of those tiny hills like workers at a busy construction site. So these are the ants most of us know best. They're called black garden ants. So we are going to roll with these ants. For short, a lot of people just call them black ants. They're small, they're dark, and obviously they're common throughout North America and Europe. If you watch them closely, they're always working, like our friends the honeybees. They live in large colonies, but instead of covertly hiding in the dark, like where we can't see them, they're doing the same thing. But in this case, they're living underground in these tiny underground city where every ant has a job and they're building these tunnels constantly. There was actually not too long ago a organization that poured concrete, not nice because it killed all the ants in this particular colony, but they poured concrete down into the ground to see the structure of all these vast tunnels. And it's truly, truly remarkable. Now, a lot of other ants that many of you may know. Let's go down a list. Carpenter ants. They tunnel through wood like miniature carpenters. Leafcutter ants. They march through the rainforest carrying pieces of leaves above their head. I'm sure you've seen these in pictures and videos. They're carrying them over their heads like they're little green umbrellas. You've got the army ants. They travel in huge swarms. Trapjaw ants. Their jaws snap shut faster than any movement in the entire animal kingdom. Harvester ants. They collect seeds the way farmers gather grain. And of course, there are these fire ants and bullet ants. There was a gentleman by the name of Justin Schmidt. He was an American entomologist, and that's a person that studies insects. He was called the King of Sting. Why? Because he created this sting pain index. He actually went around and purposely got stung by tons of different insects, mostly ants, bees, and wasps. 80 different species. He got stung up to 1,500 times. And listen to this. The fire ants, he described the pain as sharp, sudden, mildly alarming. Our honeybee friend from our previous episode, burning, corrosive, but you can handle it. The wasps, which we will have a future episode on, caustic and burning, like hydrochloric acid on a paper cut. Ooh. And the bullet ant. Listen to this. This is how he described it. Pure, intense, brilliant pain described as like walking on hot coals with a nail in your heel. Wow. I mean, just briefly, because it's important to know about this. These fire ants are found in mostly warm places, southern United States, South America, and parts of Asia. But they build these large dirt mounds. You'll find them in fields, parks, lawns, and if that mound is disturbed, they rush out quickly and I can't laugh here. They attack together as a group. They bite with their jaws and they can hold on to your skin. And when they sting, they inject some venom. So people feel like it's like they're being touched by like tiny drops of fire. And that's how they get their name. And if a person is stung, they're very often many stings at once because the fire ants tend to attack in large numbers. Now, of course, it's very important that I mention this. Typically, you don't need to go to the hospital. Afterwards, there's these small white pus blisters that can form on your skin. And I mentioned this venom. It just basically causes a sharp burning feeling, like something, like I mentioned, like you're touching something hot, like fire. So, like I said, these fire ants, it sounds worse than it actually is. But bottom line is a lot of people are allergic to bee stings. And it's very, very important to get medical attention, of course, with any bee sting and sting. Now, that bullet ant, it got its name because it apparently people have been able to reference this pain. It feels like you've been shot with a bullet. They're found mostly in rainforest. They're bigger. They're up to an inch long. And when I say rainforest, typically Central and South America. And the pain, it can last for hours and sometimes a whole day. But thankfully, they're not as aggressive unless their nest is disturbed. And the last one I'll mention here briefly is the army ant. You may have heard about them. Well, they attack and eat tons of other insects, spiders, and even sometimes little small animals that can't escape. Now, you may have seen them in stories or movies where they're like, really aggressive, but it's a little exaggerated. But the bottom line is if a particular prey is just hanging out, not moving, not trying to get away, this large swarm of army ants can quickly eat this prey. 1, 2, 3. But overall, as we get back to our friendly black ants, it's important to know that almost all are completely harmless and they're just looking for some of your leftover scraps of food that you didn't notice that fell on the floor. So back to some basics. The head. You've got 3 main body parts. First is the head. There you got the ant's eyes, the antenna, and these mandibles, which are their jaws. The mandibles are like these Swiss Army knives. They use them to carry food, dig tunnels, fight the enemies, and even carry other ants. The middle section, as you know, with all insects, that's the thorax. It's like their engine room where all the muscles are, where they move their 6 legs. And then, of course, the back end is the abdomen. This is where pretty much everything happens. This is where their stingers are located. Again, that some ants have stingers, like I mentioned. Not all. Just remember, our friend the black ant, this is what the podcast is mostly about. No stingers. You don't have to worry about our little friends. But also here in the abdomen, you've got organs that help the ant digest their food. They've got 2 stomachs, one where they store the food, one where they digest the food. And yes, here they actually produce chemicals where they can talk to each other. Connecting the thorax. This one's interesting. And remember, the wasp is almost like a cousin of the ants because you look at both of them and you look at how they look, and they're very similar. Connecting this thorax and the abdomen is a tiny narrow section called the petiole, and it makes ants look like they have this like tiny waist. The waist allows the ants to bend and twist, helping them get through the tight tunnels underground and really move all over. And you'll notice that they can stand up. on their own, like on their back legs. And yes, it's because of this petiole that allows it to do this. And their antennae. Their antennae are super-powered noses and fingers combined. They use them to smell, taste, and pretty much touch everything around them. Because ants don't talk, obviously, like we do, they don't have a language, they don't have spelling tests every week, they communicate mostly with chemicals called pheromones, which are these invisible scent signals. Now, going back to my episode on the honeybees, I mispronounced this word. Ugh. I make mistakes. Yeah, I'm not perfect. I had pronounced them as pheromones. And if you recall, this was the sense, this was the signal, excuse me. It's one and the same. But bottom line, I mentioned that this was the queen bee that sent out this pheromone that said, oh yeah, no, I'm in charge. So it's not just the queen bee that's sending out these pheromones. Everyone communicates in this sense, this signal, but specifically, they're different. This is like their language, and the pheromones in a different sense, in a different way it's communicated, can say different things. It's fascinating. Yeah, they talk like we do. But talk about these pheromones. If one ant finds food, it lays down this scent trail. It's almost like drawing an invisible road map on the ground, and yes, the other ants follow the smell. So that's why you'll see the ants traveling in these long serpentine lines. They're following that pheromone trail, that scent trail. Again, it's like hikers following this path through the woods. So next time you see that on your wall, you can go up to it. Well, you really can't smell it, but the ants can smell it. It's like, hey, here's the path forward. Look at me. You come up here, you go up the wall, and then you take a right, and we'll be back in the clear. We'll be back away from these humans. Now, in terms of the jobs inside this ant colony, very similar to the social aspect of the beehives, but here, the center of the colony, like the queen bee, is the queen ant. The queen's job is to lay all the eggs. In fact, similar to the bee, again, she's laying thousands or millions of eggs during her lifetime. In some species, this is different, where you had the queen bee living 3 to 5 years. Some of the queen ants can live 10 to 20 years, which, I mean, is just unbelievable. Now, you're never going to have to worry about, very often you see these ants, they're menaces, and you don't want them around, and you'll end up killing a lot of these ants. But you never have to worry about killing a queen ant. You're never going to see that queen. She's down deep, and she is hidden for all to see. That's obviously one of the reasons she's living so long. But the queen starts her colony. She has wings initially. She flies up into the air, and she meets her male friends. Yes, they're called drones. And sorry, guys, once the male helps the female mate, guys are done. They're history. They end up passing away. And what's fascinating then is the queen flies down, and soon she actually sheds her wings. She buries herself into the ground, starts laying her eggs, and immediately this happens. The mating will happen after a rain, typically a warm day. And if you see, again, you flying ants, it's like, whoa. And then particularly a ants that seems to be a little bit bigger that is shedding their wings on the ground, you're talking about a queen that's ready to start a whole new family, a whole new colony. So she actually pulls off her wings by herself, and then she gets to work. And it's interesting. The muscles that once powered her wings, they're actually broken down and used for energy, almost like food for her. And that's helping her survive while she's raising her first worker ants. And yes, we'll get to the worker ants. But what's interesting about the ants compared to the bees is the queen bee initially cares for her first larvae until the first worker ants can kind of grow up and then basically take over the job for her. So this is how they start their own colonies, which is very interesting. Now, ants, like bees, go through a complete metamorphosis, like our butterfly friends. First, the eggs hatch into larvae, these tiny worm-like babies. They grow, and then they turn into the pupa, which is the stage where they kind of spin their webs and hang out for a while. Then they transform into adult ants. And yes, they emerge as worker ants. The worker ants are all female, just like the worker bees. They build, they clean, they babysit. They're soldiers, yes, and they collect food for the colonies. Specifically, the soldier ants, they protect the colony from the predators, and they clear pathways for the workers to reach their food. And the worker ants, like I said, they're foraging for food all the time. They're helping feed the larvae, and they're building and defending the nest, and they're keeping the nest clean, basically by taking out all the trash. So every ant has a job. It's the queen ants, the drones, which are the guys, and then the females, who are basically the workers, and the soldier ants. What do ants eat? Well, they're not picky eaters. They love sugary foods. Obviously, we know this. They come into our house. That's what they're looking for. So if you want to attract ants, just leave sugar. Leave any kind of soda, spillage, anywhere. They also eat protein, small insects, aphids. They specifically farm. Now listen to this. Check this out. Aphids are these little tiny, like grains of sand, insects you can't even see. They eat leaves, and they produce this sweet liquid called honeydew. And ants protect them from predators in exchange for that sugary food. So it's like the ants are tiny farmers raising their cows. They're protecting these aphids. They're like living together because they can help each other. So just to make sure this is clear, the aphids, they have this needle-like mouth part. They poke into a plant and they drink the plant's sap. That's how they survive. And sure enough, when they drink this sap, this is the liquid waste that's called the honeydew. And this is where the ants come in. They love the sugary honeydew. So, like I said, they end up living together and helping each other. Now, how long do they live? Like I talked about, the queen ants, she can live for a long time. I actually read up to 30 years in some species. But our friend, the black garden ants, they only live, the common worker ants only live a few months. They can live sometimes up to a year, and the ones that stay and live through the winter, yes, they live through the winter. They burrow down deep into the ground. Talk about their tunnels helping them out. The worker ants that are born late in the summer, they live through the winter and they continue working the following spring. Now, I mentioned the drone ants, the guys, they don't live very long at all, and they don't live over the winter. Now, I talked about the way that our friends, the bees, can live over the winter. The honeybees, they cluster around the queen bee. And yes, they produce with their wings temperatures of 95 degrees when it's literally 20 degrees outside. But our friends, the ants, the worker ants and the queen ant burrow down deep in the ground, go into this diapause stage that is just like the bumblebee queen bee. Just the queen bee for the bumblebee. We mentioned this in our previous episode on the honeybees. So this diapause stage, which is basically a slowing down, not a complete hibernation like bears, but they slow down their metabolism, their movement stops, and their energy is conserved. So they're not fully asleep like the mammals in hibernation, the bears, but they're pretty much not doing anything, but they survive the winter. Now, to wrap up our podcast, you may have heard some amazing fun facts about ants, and there's so many, but let's just go into a few. They're small, but they can lift 10 to 50 times their body weight. It's like us lifting a car or a bus. Some species of ants build their own living bridges when they got to get from one place to another, and it's like impossible or will take forever. You know, maybe it's got a little valley here and you got a little, raging river, and they got to move from one spot to another. They build their own bridge, attaching themselves, and then little by little, when everyone crosses the bridge, then the actual bridge that they made with their bodies, they kind of climb over each other and they end up literally being able to get to the other side. They make these living rafts. You may think, how is it that they survive all these floods and a huge mass of water that comes down? Well, they can build living rafts, especially in the south of the United States. These fire ants, they will grab onto each other and they'll create this like lattice structure that is a raft that will allow them to reach dry land and not die. But our friendly black garden ants that this podcast episode is so much about, that we all can see, you got to picture this. It just doesn't make sense, but it's true. They survive floods, the huge rainstorms that come down in buckets, and sometimes in my backyard, I'll have a lake in the backyard. How is it that they can actually survive? They don't swim, but they are hardwired, which from my younger members of the audience basically means their brains are, when they're born, they just know what to do. It's instinct. So what happens? This labyrinth of their tunnels underground, they're not just holes, their nest. They're upward sloping chambers in some of these safe rooms. And where are the safe rooms? Well, obviously with the queen ants and with the babies, they have it such that when the ground floods, check this out, that air gets trapped in some of these higher pockets, some of these higher rooms and tunnels. So it's creating these oxygen bubbles where the queen and the babies can wait for the water to disappear. And ants don't have lungs. They breathe, like most insects, they breathe through their tiny holes in their bodies called spiracles. So when they're submerged, when they're flooded, they can close these holes and survive underwater for a whole day, even multiple days, because they slow down their metabolism. And it's like these, they have these built-in life jackets. They're naturally water repellent. Their tiny body hairs trap a layer of air around them, allowing them to float or walk on the water surface rather than sinking. So you see in some of those, occasionally, you get ants that may appear into the bathroom and they go down the sink. Well, yeah, they may end up still surviving. It's amazing. So if it's not all these combinations together, then you've got some of these other species that are building their own living rafts. So they are resilient, these ants. Now, a few other fun facts. We mentioned about there being lots of bees. There are quadrillions of ants, so many ants on our planet. It's such a large number, our brains can't comprehend how many ants there are. We mentioned army ants. Well, they have interesting lives. They call them army ants because they basically don't have their own nest. They basically link their own bodies together, and that's their house for the queen and the larvae. And similar to our honeybees, some of the ant species have the same situation in terms of feeding royal jelly to the select babies, the chosen babies that will ultimately end up being the queen ants. Now, how about this one? You remember from my episode on the honeybee, we talked about the regurgitation. Yeah, how they actually make the honey. the honeybees that come out, the foragers, they end up kind of kissing each other, and that's their way to ultimately transfer their food. Well, the ants have a similar situation inside their abdomen. They have two stomachs, and this one specialized stomach is called a crop. So it's like a storage tank where the food is held, but it's not digested. So when another ant is hungry, the forager ant, the one that collects the food from your little breadcrumb, just know that that breadcrumb, when it's going back to the colony, it's basically thrown up into the mouth of another ant that's hungry. And yeah, it feeds the larvae, the other baby ants. So there's this transfer. And yes, it's fascinating because it's not just a two-way street. In some species of ants, the larvae actually regurgitate some of the fluids back to the adults, providing them with their own kind of food and their proteins that they can't get elsewhere. So what's interesting about this process, and remember, this process, the nice scientific word, instead of throwing up, with the bees making honey and with the ants ultimately feeding their young and feeding their friends and their brothers and sisters, it's called trophallaxis. Trophallaxis. I told you I told you I took speech in second grade. One more time. Let's go. I can do this. Trophallaxis. Trophallaxis. I got it. So, few more fun facts. They hear with their knees. Ants don't have ears. They listen by sensing vibrations through the ground with these specialized sensors on their feet and knees. There I go again. Feet and knees. They have 5 eyes. Their vision isn't the best. They have 2 compound eyes and 3 smaller, simple eyes on the top of their heads to detect light, and they can only really see a few feet in front of them. And they smell with their antennae. Yes, their smell is kind of like 3-dimensional. It helps them follow these complex pheromone trails that I mentioned elsewhere. And yeah, guess what? When they get sick, they can spend time outside the nest to prevent infecting their friends. It's kind of like, yeah, I know I have a runny nose and I know I'm sneezing, so I'm going to get out of the class. And they instinctually know how to do this. Amazing. And finally, I just love the fact that we just have so many of these entomologists that study insects, and we actually know that there's these undertaker ants. They have specialized jobs, some of them that remove dead ants and waste to different piles far away from all the living quarters to keep the nest underground clean. Isn't that interesting? They know to put garbage, and yes, I'm sorry, your friends, ultimately you put them in a separate place so they can have their final resting place. Friends, this has been so interesting. There's so much more to learn, but I hope you've got a nice little introduction to all about ants. Reach out to me at kevmok21@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook group. And hey, always love those 5-star reviews and ratings. Really appreciate it. Until next time, have fun and keep learning.